From the Thomas K. McKeon Center for Creativity at the Tulsa Community College Metro Campus in downtown Tulsa, this is the Big Blue Podcast. I'm Greg Stone, Provost of the Southeast Campus, here as always, or very nearly as always, with our president, Dr. Lee Goodson. Dr. Goodson, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Our very special guest today is Dr. Kendra Reynolds, who is this year's Fulbright Scholar in Residence, both here at Tulsa Community College and at the University of Tulsa. Dr. Reynolds, it's really great to have you here, not only with us today, but having you join us this year in Oklahoma and at Tulsa Community College. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here.
In the last several years, I've said we have partnered with the University of Tulsa and have been very fortunate to have been awarded Fulbright Scholar in Residence recipients. You are the most recent, and we've had experts in various other fields, and it's just a great way for our students as well as our faculty and staff to have the opportunity to meet and to learn from scholars from other places. I'm curious, what appealed to you about these two institutions and about Oklahoma? Because as my understanding of the process, you apply for this program yourself. Institutions apply to have a scholar come to them, and then we sort of match up one another. And so I'm curious, what drew you to Tulsa, Oklahoma?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one in that most Fulbrights are going to Harvard or kind of the more touristy places like New York and things like that. I think what appealed to me about Tulsa was the fact that I thought I would be getting a real insight into real America, like I was coming into the heart of America. And I wanted the real, authentic experience. And I think Oklahoma has a reputation for kind of being a red state or quite conservative, and I think with my research being more kind of liberal and in looking into kind of feminist literature and things, I thought that I had a different perspective to bring to somewhere like Oklahoma and maybe to open students' minds to maybe different perspectives and theories and ways of thinking. So I really wanted to step outside of my comfort zone as well, and then in turn to maybe push the boundaries of what students were thinking about as well. So that kind of appealed to me. And the two institutions, I thought having a public and a private institution was really innovative in that I just got a real kind of insight into the two different aspects of education in America. So I thought that was something quite unique about this project that appealed to me as well.
Yeah,
that is unique.
And if I'm remembering right, there are not many of those kinds of partnerships in the U.S. in this program. So
no, there's not. It's usually people going to study something at a particular university or at one institution, but I think Fulbright is really enthusiastic about this one. Even when I was at the kind of day in London where they were kind of overviewing all of the projects and wanted us to meet the other Fulbrighters, it was one that really stood out, and a couple of the people in charge of Fulbright really wanted to make it clear that they liked the fact that this was quite unique in that respect. So It was good.
So in your biography, you wrote that your aim as a Fulbright Scholar in Residence, and I'm going to take this quote from your biography, is to create a cross-cultural dialogue that enriches and expands both my mindset as a scholar and the mindset of students and those in the wider Tulsa community. Can you share with us a couple of examples of those dialogues you've been able to have so far during your time in Tulsa?
Yeah, I'm actually really happy about this aspect of it because it's gone really well in terms of even just visiting guest lectures or classes at TCC, and we've talked about ideas such as the other or who is foreign. And for me, people here are foreign and they've never thought of themselves in that way before. So again, it's just kind of complicating those notions. And by students interacting with me, even if it's in a brief visit like that, they get an insight into another culture and they start to see their own culture from like a detached vantage point, which is quite interesting for them as well, because they're kind of teaching me about the world here. So that's been kind of interesting in terms of broadening their kind of mindsets in terms of foreignness or otherness. But I think most exciting for me was the fact that in Composition 2 that I'm teaching this semester, I have designed a unit that links the Troubles of Northern Ireland, so the conflict between Catholics and Protestants in the 70s to the 90s. I've linked that to some issues in the Tulsa Race Massacre. So I learnt about that whenever I got here, and just the parallels and crossovers have been really interesting. So students have really gotten behind that, and they're quite excited about it in terms of the empathy that has come out of the fact that they can see those crossovers and those dark periods of history that kind of haunt both societies. So that's been really, really good. Yeah.
It's interesting
That's
to me,
amazing.
having been an undergraduate living in Tulsa, I never knew about the Tulsa Race
Yeah.
Massacre until I was a college undergrad, and even then there was so little
Yeah,
that anyone really seemed to know about it or talk about. So to have our students be so well versed in that subject, and then, as you said, to be able to overlay that with the Troubles,
Yes.
really gives them. I'm in some ways almost jealous that they have that perspective at a time
I
in life
agree.
when I just didn't. So. Well, your thesis recently was published, or has already been published this
Has
year.
been published,
Has been
yes.
published by Routledge. Congratulations, as
Thank
you
you.
said, based on your doctoral work. The title of the book is "Feminist Architecture of Postmodern Anti-Tales, Space, Time, and Bodies." Just give us a brief overview of the book. I know it's a difficult thing to
it's-
say. Please boil your life's work down to 2 minutes, but
Yeah.
tell us about that, and maybe start by explaining what an anti-tale is.
Yeah, that is a wordy title. I'll give it that. But the anti-tale is basically a radical revision of a fairy tale narrative. I look at it in terms of feminist standpoint. So, for example, the fairy tale has a really simplistic structure. So it's kind of this binary structure where you have men on one hand, women on the other, good, evil, young and old. And one half of these dualisms is always privileged over the other, so men over women, for example. What the anti-tale does, or so my book argues, is it kind of complicates that architecture. So you're looking at the kind of in-between, the grey crossovers where reality is not quite as neat as the fairy tale allows for, and that people don't fit into very neat square boxes, and that we need to kind of blast open those old tales to form new ways of being in the world is kind of the overall idea of it.
Sounds interesting. I'm have certainly taught some fairy tales myself in composition classes, having students look at them. So I'm very excited to get your book and to be able to explore some of those ideas.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Lee Goodson here with my co-host, Dr. Greg Stone, and you're listening to the Big Blue Podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Kendra Reynolds, and we've been talking about her experience as a Fulbright scholar right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the University of Tulsa and Tulsa Community College share this opportunity each year. And we are one of the options on the application process, and we are so grateful that you chose us in your search for a great research opportunity. Much of your teaching and scholarship has focused on issues of identity, right?
Yes, yeah.
And the breakdown of borders and boundaries and discrimination of the other. As someone who is not an American, how has your time here in the U.S. informed your thinking of these issues? And have you had some experiences that you'll be able to take back to Ireland as you continue to explore the ways identification and borders impact our experiences and the stories that we tell? So tell us some things that have happened to you, have had an impact on the way you've developed your thinking up to this point.
Yeah, it's interesting because the borders, the idea of the other, issues of identity are so huge now for America and for Northern Ireland with Brexit and things. So it's kind of the ideal moment to kind of step out of my own culture and see how another society is kind of dealing with that. I think the big thing for me is that whether you're in Northern Ireland or you're in America, you see the opposite culture only on the news, or you get a broad overview and you get a kind of stereotype of how things are. I think for me, interacting with the students has been fundamental in giving me the stories of real people that kind of undermine that. The dominant views, or those in power, the views of those in power don't represent the people here. A lot of people here are much more complex thinkers than that, and I think I can take that back with me. And the idea that borders are global, not a local issue. I did an outreach poetry workshop, an Irish one, for TCC and their continuing education program, and I think a powerful moment for me was one of our kind of issues was borders, and we were reading some Irish poetry related to that. But then members of the community then started talking about the borders here and the idea of walls, what borders symbolise for them. They even talked about language and in terms of borders and things, and we got to thinking about it in a more kind of philosophical level, and it was really interesting, just their ideas of divisions and how it's impacting their lives and their families, and the notion that you have to be on one side or the other, a Republican or a Democrat. They talked about that as well, and just how it relates to the Catholic and Protestant issues in Northern Ireland, and we were able to empathise on that level. So I think sharing my stories here and being able to share their stories back home is a real nice crossover, and shows that we are looking to the future and we don't want to get caught up in these kind of discussions where identity is so constrained to these neat boxes. It's actually much more complicated than that.
Dr. Reynolds, I wondered, you mentioned earlier Oklahoma being known as being a red state, which certainly it is,
Yeah.
but being a little more complex than maybe a lot of people realize. I'm just wondering, what has surprised you so far about Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that has surprised me was that I was nervous coming out here and teaching the material that I research. So the feminist literature or the ideas of queer theory and things like that. I was nervous about it, and I didn't know how the students would react. But it has been amazing, the response. Students have actually said they really enjoy the material. And after class, the last day, I think it was Wednesday, one of my students actually said to me that they have more conservative views than the literature that I teach, but they're thoroughly enjoying the module because they're getting to see another perspective. And for me, that's kind of what it was all about in the first place. So that's been really rewarding and has kind of surprised me in a good way as well. And then on a kind of more human level, the weather has really shocked me because
It shocks us as well.
Yeah, it's crazy because I came here in August and the humidity and the heat is something I'm just not used to.
It's oppressive.
It is, yeah, unfortunately it is. So those
But
have surprised me.
it's a nice mild winter, so.
We
Yeah,
have had a
that's
pretty mild
true.
winter.
Yeah, we have a mild winter. Well, one question that we ask each of our guests is if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self a piece of advice, what would you say?
Yeah, I think that for me it would be to enjoy the journey rather than worrying so much about it. I know when I was studying, I was so worried about the next grade or the next assignment, but really education or learning is about developing as a whole person and just enjoying the process. I would like to tell myself to do that more, I think. Yeah.
Good
That's
advice.
good. That's really good advice.
Advice that the two of us at that age, not to project onto you, Dr. Goodson, but probably both of us could have used a little bit of that
I
kind
could
of
probably
advice.
use it right now.
Well, there's that
yeah.
too. Well, you've been listening to the Big Blue podcast from the Thomas K. McKeon Center for Creativity at Tulsa Community College's Metro Campus. And we do want to thank again our guest, Dr. Kendra Reynolds, for spending some time with us today. And we want to thank all of you for listening. Remember, you can catch the Big Blue podcast each week in the week at TCC and on the Creativity channel at YouTube. Dr. Reynolds, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having
Enjoy
me.
the rest of your stay. Dr.
Thank you.
Goodson, have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stone.
And we will see you all next time.
All right.